If you've ever built your own PC, then you probably agree that cable management is one of the worst parts of it. Well, the folks at Maingear agree, and to that end, they've built a brand new type of PC that they're calling a Zero PC. In that, they have a special motherboard with hidden connectors, and all of your cabling goes behind that, hidden from view, leaving the entirety of your PC wide open. Too good to be true? I'm Ron Burke, editor-in-chief for Gamingtrend.com. Let's unbox this thing and find out. Despite their stellar reputation in the industry, we've actually never gotten to unbox a Maingear PC. That's kind of important if you're buying a pre-built from them. So in this, we'll also get to see how well they box their machines and how they should hold up to shipping. So without further ado, let's unbox this thing. I swear I'm not sponsored by FlexiSpot, but I love this desk. So we're gonna go ahead and lower this down a little bit. Lighting rigs all stayed in place. And we'll pull this out of the box. Now that's going to be really difficult even from this height, so I'm probably going to turn this on its side. You can hear somebody from Maingear screaming, please don't do that, but I'm doing it anyway. The first thing out of the box is this sealed air foam packet. This is going to conform to the size of the box and take up any of the extra room that you might have once you have the PC inside. I've seen entirely too many manufacturers, Dell included, that just skip that part. They rely on the foam, which we're going to pull out in just a minute here, to do all the work. And I can tell you, the amount of PCs that came in damaged that I had to repair were too numerous to count. Trying to do this very carefully and stay on camera. There we go. All right. Box dislodged. Let's get this in position. With everything out of the box, I was very glad to see the very first thing. This is a quality assurance checklist. I can see that the Maingear team has checked chassis, CPU, RAM, GPU, storage, PSU, powered it on, checked the BIOS, checked the OS, drivers, activation, recovery, optional software, power cables, recovery USB, I'm sure that's going to be in this bag, additional cabling, and also went through and tested benchmark, stability test, heat tests. You've got a builder, you got a QA tech, and a manager all signed off. So they're putting their stuff through a rigorous testing procedure to make sure that what you ordered is what arrives. Next out of the box is a quick start guide. It begins with a short letter from CEO for Maingear, Wallace Santos, welcoming you to the Maingear family. Below that, it goes through a checklist. And, well, given what's number one, I'm sure that they've run into this more than once. Plug your monitor cable into the graphics card. Then it has a warning below that says, do not confuse this with built-in motherboard video ports. Refer to picture on the back, and it's marked in red. Tells you exactly what not to do. I'm certain that they've gotten more than a few calls about, hey, why is my PC so slow? I paid so much money for this. And all they've done is try to use the integrated graphics card. An easy fix, but nice that they actually included this. It goes through how to plug in your mouse and keyboard, power cable, Ethernet cable, or connect your Wi-Fi antenna. Plug your headphone cables into the audio port on the front or back of the PC. And if you're using USB, plug it into any USB port, and you're now ready to power on the system and enjoy your new PC. On the back, it goes, do not connect your monitor here, but also has all of your different port types for this particular PC, Ethernet ports, USB type 3.2 type A, 2.0, 3.2 type C, 3.1 type A, where you put in the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth antenna, and your display ports and HDMI ports. So it's very comprehensive, showing you exactly what goes where. If you are a novice to PCs, this is a great guide. As I get this out of the plastic, now I have no idea if this is true, but it seems like something they would do. We've got green tape here. Green means go. This is ready to ship. Now we have it entirely out of the plastic. Let's take a closer look. We're going to start at the top and work our way down. I've gone ahead and removed 2 screws from the rear. So I'll open up the top. You can see that this grill is see-through, so no real air blockage there. Below that, we have a 360 millimeter radiator with 3 fans directly underneath. And Back here, obviously, is going to be where all the magic happens behind the motherboard. We're going to flip this on its side now. Carefully. And removing this, these are simply little detents that are holding it in place. And now we can get a closer look at what's inside. Just at first glance, you can see there are a number of improvements to the graphic mounting system. I may actually get one of these for my own case. This is looks like a 3D printed bracket system that locks into the screw holes for these fans behind it, and it's going to hold something like this 4080 Super in place. That is not going to move. So that is a great advancement. I have a great deal of respect for that. I might have to get one for myself. Now, one of the things that you can do when you go to order this PC is customize it. I'm not quite sure the specs on this one. We'll get into that when we power things on, but generally speaking, there are a couple of things that you can see right out of the gate. We have obviously the aforementioned radiator up top here at 360 millimeters with included fans, rear fan, 3 more fans back here. I don't think there's a radiator behind these, so I think these are just air induction. The aforementioned 2080, this bracket system is very cool. Honestly, I think I'll probably try and find the 3D file for this and print it myself, because that appears to be 3D printed. But that's just simply screwed into the screw holes for the fan, and that's going to hold that in place. The biggest customization is going to be this motherboard. See here it says Project Zero. This is a custom board from MSI, but it's very similar to their MSI B760 Gaming Plus. That's a board that I've used quite a few times in multiple builds. Highly stable, highly rated, not overly expensive. I think it's about 180 bucks on Amazon. And obviously it's not going to have all of the special things that allow this to be entirely wire-free, but a good all-around board just the same. That board is an LGA 1700 capable board, so you can use everything from a 12th gen all the way to a 14th gen processor, and it's going to handle 128 gigs of DDR5 all the way up to 6800 megahertz. So you've got a really solid foundation for the rest of everything that goes inside your system. Other than the motherboard and the case, you can customize this thing quite a bit. And you'll see that reflected on the website where you have silver, gold, platinum, ruby, diamond, and legendary, and ultimate even beyond that, for configurations. And obviously you can customize in between those different packages, but the idea is that other than the case and the motherboard, all the rest of the components are fairly commodity. You can get those off the shelf, and it means that you can also upgrade it until you need to replace the board, which, as I mentioned, the board that's in there is quite good. So this configuration appears to be the legendary, and that is a GeForce RTX 4080 Super, as we already said, an Intel Core i9-14900K, 32 gigs of RGB DDR5 at 6000 megahertz. I bet we can push that higher. 2 terabyte Gen 4 M2 NVMe SSD, and options to, as they put it, boost to 64 gigs and 4 terabytes. So you'll have to look on the page. I'll put that on the page here in just a second for you to look at to see the different packages, to figure out exactly what you want, but also know that you can tweak that. If you already have a video card, there's obviously options, or if you want to put more or less memory in, you simply have to select it. I cranked up the lighting to a ridiculous level so you can see what I see, or more accurately, what I don't see. Other than this one power cable, the 600 watt coming from the power supply for the 2080 Super, there's just no cabling. You have this one tube set here to the radiator. Honestly, I would suspect that if they could somehow find a way to hide those two, they would. But as it stands, these are the most direct paths, and everything's clean and out of the way. There are no cables to speak of, and nothing to impede airflow. And if you're all about that tidy case look, well, it doesn't get any cleaner than this. Now let's open up the back and see what sin there is behind that. Looking at the back, I see a lot of really great cable management and only one really bad habit. So we've got great cable management. Everything is as short of a run as it can be. I'm not sure if these are custom cables or not, but they don't appear to be. The only bad habit that I see are these twist ties, or these zip ties. You've got zip ties that are pulled way too tight. I see this in networking a lot as well, where people will overcrank RJ45 or, God forbid, fiber to the point that they no longer work. So this is fine to bundle everything together to keep it out of the way. This is not fine. When you're pulling so tight that you've started to deform the board pins itself, you've got a problem. So ease up on the zip strips and maybe not pull so hard. This is already clean enough. Let this slack just a little bit and it will help these things last quite a bit longer, especially if somebody ever has to get back here and do anything like an upgrade or move some things around like change a fan. The GPU bracket that they've installed, and they've used locking nuts on this, so these should stay in place. Good choice on that. I have seen people that put in custom gear. They'll use standard off the shelf, just nuts on the back, and those tend to come out. These will stay put, and they're not going to suddenly fall into something that they shouldn't get into. As we've mentioned a few times, this is a proprietary board, so you have connectors that are normally on the other side, facing on the inside. We'll start here. That's the main power bus for the entire board. So it's facing towards the rear, so it can be routed down to your power supply. This has an 850 for the power supply. Below that, we have, this is the USB-C header, and it looks like they put in a custom connector to allow that to go 90 degrees. So standard connector here, 90-degree angle in there. This next one is your USB 3.0 header. So that's going to be all of your standard USB Type A ports. The last ports are these two here. These are ports that normally face down. Sorry, all of you in Britain, what I just said twice. These normally face down, they're facing upwards this way. And then we have the wiring that heads back down here to the power supply. Jumping back to the front for the last few things, we have the couple of ports that are on the front. You have your power button here, an LED button here to cycle through your various LEDs. You have your audio jack that I mentioned, the last item on the board there. Then you have two ports, a USB-SS and a USB-C port here. So USB-SS stands for super speed, and that's going to give you USB 3.0. If you need something higher than that, well, that's going to be your 3.2 header here, your USB-C. It isn't to say you can't plug things into this. Just realize that you're not going to get the full speed. You're going to get about 480 megs per second versus USB 3.2, especially I think on this board it's 2x2. So that's going to give you full 10 gigs per second. So just depending on what you need to plug in there, it may or may not make a difference. Most of the time not. Half the time I see people just charging their phones with these. But just the same, here's your I/O for the front of the case. Now I'll take one quick look at the back of the case as soon as I cover the key on the back. Now, there is an area that I'd like to see MSI update, and that is this sheet. So this sheet doesn't precisely match the case that they've shipped. So this board does have a different layout. It's not going to confuse me, but it might confuse other people. So I went ahead and covered the Windows CD key, which good on them for including this and putting it on the case. Many manufacturers forget to do that. I believe that's a requirement to maintain your certification with Microsoft. So good on them for doing the right thing. We have a number of USB, I believe these are 2.0 Type A ports. So this is going to be useful for a mouse, a keyboard, even things like a flight controller most of the time don't require a whole lot of speed, so you can simply plug it in here. Your other HDMI and DisplayPort, these are going to go to the integrated graphics card. That's to say that the graphics card that's on your processor. Down here we have our first USB 3.2 port. So that is a super speed port. We mentioned that just a minute ago. And then this Type C is a super speed 20, which is to say that's going to go 20 gigs per second. Now there are faster ones, USB 3.2 Gen 2 times 2, because good Lord, why do we have to name our USB things this way? But this one will go 20 gigs. There are ones that will actually go 40. Keep that in mind if the particular device that you've purchased requires that level of speed. I don't think if there's really anything on the market, it'll just go faster if you happen to have like an external drive that could use the additional speed. But all of these things can plug into all of these things. As long as the port matches, you're probably good to go. And if not, Windows will tell you. We've got two more. These are Super Speed 10. Now, Super Speed 10, just like this one, that's telling you that that's a USB 3.2 Gen 2. So that's gonna be 10 gigs per second, these three ports. So if you're not getting full speed, you're probably using a 3.0 port versus a 3.2 port. Keep that in mind. Your fastest ports are red, then these are gonna be your slower ones. 2.5 gigs, not everybody has a decent connectivity to the outside world, but you can get pretty good connectivity to everything else in your network. So this 2.5 gigs sounds like overkill, except when you think about possibly maybe copying a game to another system. If you are playing Steam games, you can now transfer from your one PC to the other without having to re-download everything. Well, that's going to be very dependent on this port. 2.5 gigs per second is going to get you playing a lot faster than even a 1 gig port, or God forbid, we go back to 100. Down here we have Wi-Fi, and this is a Wi-Fi 6E. So if your router happens to support Wi-Fi 6, this is going to have 6E support, and Windows will pop up and tell you, hey, good job, this thing supports 6. It's going to go even faster. It's not going to tell you how much faster. All that's really dependent on the gremlins that handle all the Wi-Fi. The last few items here, SPDIF, unless you have a reason to know anything about this port, you can skip it. But that, well, I guess really if you're connecting something with an optical jack, this is where you would do that. This is pretty much unused for most people, but it is a way to connect if you want to split up your connectivity maybe to a receiver where you've got HDMI going one way, but your audio is run separately. That's a whole different video. Let's move on. Then these last ports here, you have audio jacks, microphone, left and right out. These are somewhat interchangeable, so they are labeled, but if you plug something in incorrectly, Windows is pretty good about saying, hey, I think the thing you just plugged in is not where you think it is. What kind of thing is this? You can go, oh yeah, I just plugged in a headphone, but I did it in the microphone jack. And Windows will happily go along with it and say, cool, I'm gonna go ahead and remap that for you, which may or may not cause you problems later. It'd be better to stick with the ports that they actually belong in, but if you don't, well, it's not the end of the world. The last set of ports here are for the graphics card. That's obviously your HDMI port and 3 display ports. These are becoming more uncommon. If you haven't moved to DisplayPort, it's probably a good time to do so. And then obviously we have a power connector down here at the bottom. I'm off camera, but it's a standard power connector. It doesn't require any sort of special cable. You can pick these up really anywhere. As I button all this up, I have to say this is probably the easiest case I've worked in a very long time. Really well designed. I know I'm not reviewing the case per se, but I have to say this is pretty nice. The shape is a little weird, but it does allow for a lot more airflow on the front, and it certainly makes it more of a showcase if you're into that. Which, let's be honest, if you're buying something like this, you are. The next test is going to be performance. Now, obviously, we know what a 4080 Super can do. We've done reviews on them before. What I'll be interested in is the direct impact that this type of case has on thermals. So I'm not so much concerned about how well it's going to run any particular game. I'm more interested in running this to death and seeing how well this extra space in the case makes any sort of difference. To do any sort of testing, well, we got to open the last item on the list, and that is this bag. So there are already a number of things in here that I appreciate. Anytime you change out a hard drive, you must, I'm declaring it, you must change out the cables. Otherwise, when you do have a problem, you're going to constantly have in the back of your head that you didn't change this cable. These are incredibly cheap. Change them when you change a drive. It'll spare you a whole lot of headache later. It's nice that they included some just for fun. A nice Maingear branded cable tie for your power supply. This is the little blade on the back that you use for Wi-Fi. You screw these into those knobs that we saw earlier, and this is magnetic, so it can sit really anywhere. Now, one of the things that I do appreciate when you put a good power supply in, it comes with a lot of extra cabling, and Maingear either doesn't want to store this, which I would totally understand, or feels like you should own it because you bought it. So they've gone ahead and included all the power strips that you might need, power plugs that you might need if you were to add something or need to change something. So if for whatever reason you decided that you wanted a stack of mechanical drives down here, maybe you're setting this up as a really expensive NAS server and also game server, I don't recommend that. You could plug in these cables and run them in somewhat of a stealth way down here through the bottom part of the tray. And the cables are there to do that. Same thing with these. These are for plugging in SATA drives, some replacement PCIe parts. So again, if you were to happen to need it, I can't think of why you would with the connectors that are in here, but they've gone ahead and included them. Maingear stickers and logos. And then the last item here is an item that I appreciate, and I've never actually seen separately, so I'm going to be stealing this part number to go get some for myself. Anytime you put it in an M.2 drive, there's always a chance that you're going to drop the tiny, tiny screw. And when you drop the tiny, tiny screw, once you're done crying, you can find them occasionally on Amazon to replace them. And hopefully you get the right ones that go into your board. These guys were nice enough to include instead a little locking mechanism. So this replaces that little screw, it screws into the spot, and instead has a little latch. So that way, when you're changing out your M.2, you simply move the latch, remove it, put the new one in, close the latch, you're done. No tiny screw to lose, no tears. Thanks for including it. I'm quite sure if I opened this up, I would see that they've already put the latch in place on this board. So kudos to you guys. I appreciate this. All right, everything's out of the box. Let's get this hooked up to power and start doing some testing.
Now, obviously, Maingear doesn't actually make anything inside this box, they simply assemble it. That said, there's some fantastic assembly work inside this box. The only thing that we really found were those over-tightened cables in the back of the box, and, well, it's just somebody being a little overzealous with the cable ties. Really not a huge deal. I'd give their cabling an A. Now, in terms of the rest of the configuration, the BIOS was set up perfectly. It was running the most current version. Really, everything was set up the way I would set it up if I were building a machine from scratch. So in terms of configuration, this is going to run as fast as it will possibly run right out of the box. So if you're looking to buy a machine and not have to tinker with it, there you go. I was surprised to see how much of a difference the new motherboard configuration made. Having all of the cabling behind the board and just having a clear path for all of your heat to be able to escape out the back actually brought the temperatures down to around 70 to 75 degrees under load. And normally you're seeing temperatures around 10 degrees higher than that. And that probably has to do with their choice of cabling, the choice of fans, thermal paste selected. It seems like they've really gone top shelf with all of it. Now the fans, I have to mention, are dead silent. The fan on the GPU only runs when there's load, so that's not really contributing to the sound. But there's no sound to hear here. Here. On the back of these, you have these 320 millimeter fans, and then the radiator has 320s, and there's 120 in the back. I think I've got all those right. And you would expect that this would sound like a jet engine when under load, but in fact, it's very, very quiet. If there wasn't RGB, you'd probably have to check and make sure it's actually running. It's that quiet, even under load. So the tuning on these, I'm not sure what fans these are, but the tuning on them is superb. I'll have to look up what those are because they are rock solid. And I do also have to pay a special compliment to this motherboard attachment for the GPU bracket. Again, I'm going to try and find where I can get those because that is a must-have. As GPUs continue to get heavier, being able to bolt it directly to the board ensures that it does not move. And so I'm going to try and get a link to that. I'm going to try and get someplace where you can 3D print it. I'm not sure how that's going to work, but I'm going to give it a shot because that is a game changer as well. So kudos to Maingear on finding a solution for these heavy boards other than, I don't know, throwing a Metroid underneath it to hold it up. Now that brings us to the proprietary nature of this setup. The motherboard and this case are really a matched pair. And that means that you're kind of tied into this. Once you get here, you're kind of tied into it going forward. Now, obviously, this case is not necessarily proprietary. You could use a standard motherboard with it, but the motherboard is very much tied to this type of case. I think there's like 1 or 2 other cases that will work with this board. Now, that's obviously not Maingear's problem. They're configuring this system as you see it, and they have about 5 or 6 different variants of this with up or down in your component levels. But I will say this, I'm impressed with this particular pair. The case works remarkably well for taking that hot air and jettisoning it out the back. And also, like I mentioned just a second ago, not sounding like a jet engine. And there's plenty of room for expansion if you were inclined to do that, although that does kind of mess up the whole purpose of this, which is to remove all the extraneous cabling and hard drives and everything else. That said, on the back of this, you do have some mounts for SSDs, and there's obviously spots for the M.2 drives underneath that GPU. So you do have the opportunity to grow with this case. Just know that you are buying into something that is proprietary. Now, the last stop is obviously price. Maingear has this particular setup on their site in many different configurations, and given that these are commodity devices, the price is going to fluctuate. Obviously, prices go up and down all the time. There are sales. So depending on what you put in the case, it's going to fluctuate the price. So that's truly up to you to do your homework and figure out what parts work. I will say this, that makes this about how well does Maingear put a box together and does it perform the way we expect? And the answer is yes, the performance is rock solid. I talked about the temperatures already, but we obviously know what a 4080 Super will do. We've done reviews on that before. So we don't expect to see different performance, but I was happy to see that the thermals were solid on this particular case. So I have confidence that whatever you put in this case is going to be well put together and it's going to perform the way you expect. Seeing the configurations also correct, that's just icing on the cake. That means you're not having to go in and tweak after you purchase your machine. So this is really our first Maingear machine, and what a way to start. You guys nailed it right out of the gate. And on top of it, what a cool configuration this is. If you're the kind of person that likes to show off your case, this is not something you want to put underneath. This is something you want to put on top of your desk and show it off. I'm Ron Burke, editor-in-chief for Gamingtrend.com. Big thanks to Maingear for loaning this machine to us for us to check it out. I appreciate that. Look forward to working with you guys in the future on similar builds like this. Stay safe, everybody. We'll see you again very soon.